Hollywood's golden age is remembered as a carefully preserved illusion. Black and white films, elegant stars, scripted romance, and the promise that fame elevated people above ordinary human flaws. But what if that illusion was never about innocence at all? What if it was about control, deciding which truths were allowed to surface and which ones were quietly erased? Because beneath the glamour, behind studio gates and flashing cameras, real crimes unfolded. Not rumors, not whispers. Crimes that were documented, prosecuted, or quietly excused, depending on who committed them. And the question you should keep asking as this story unfolds is simple. If these people were not famous, would their crimes have been tolerated at all? 1. Charlie Chaplin, When Genius Met the Law. Charlie Chaplin was more than a movie star. He was a global symbol of empathy at a time when the world was collapsing under war, poverty, and political fear. Without speaking a word on screen, he made millions laugh, and just as many feel understood. But while Chaplin's public image represented compassion, his private life raised troubling questions that could no longer be ignored. Chaplin repeatedly pursued relationships with women far younger than himself, behavior that even in a morally flexible era caused discomfort. In 1944, that discomfort turned into legal consequence when he was convicted under the Mann Act, a federal law aimed at prosecuting immoral conduct involving interstate transportation. The conviction did not immediately destroy him. Studios continued to profit from his work. Audiences still applauded. But something shifted quietly and irreversibly. Why did the government suddenly treat one of its most celebrated artists as a threat? Why was Chaplin scrutinized only after decades of unchecked behavior? Years later, when Chaplin left the United States, he was refused re-entry. The man who helped define American cinema was effectively exiled. So ask yourself, was this justice? Or was it convenience? Was Chaplin punished for his crime, or for becoming politically and socially inconvenient? 2. Mae West, arrested for refusing to be silent. Before Mae West became a Hollywood legend, she became something far rarer, a woman punished for speaking too openly. In the 1920s, American society maintained strict boundaries around female expression. Sexuality, independence, and desire were treated not as realities, but as threats. Mae West didn't merely cross those boundaries. She challenged their existence. Her Broadway play Sex depicted themes authorities considered obscene, not because they were criminal acts, but because they acknowledged women as active participants in their own lives. The response was swift and unforgiving. Mae West was arrested, tried, and sentenced to jail. Why was a stage play treated as a crime scene? Why was a woman's voice considered dangerous enough to imprison? Mae West served her sentence without apology. And when she emerged, she understood something most never did. Scandal could be weaponized. Hollywood later embraced her boldness, but only after reshaping it into entertainment. Her criminal record wasn't erased, it was repackaged. So the question remains, was Mae West punished for breaking the law, or for refusing to obey silence? 3. Bugsy Siegel, crime that Hollywood welcomed. Bugsy Siegel never pretended to be innocent. What makes his story disturbing isn't his criminality. It's how comfortably it coexisted with celebrity culture. During the 1930s and 1940s, Siegel became a public figure not despite his crimes, but alongside them. Racketeering, extortion, and murder conspiracies followed him like rumors no one dared confirm aloud. And yet, he lived openly in Beverly Hills, surrounded by actors, producers, and power brokers who enjoyed his company without questioning its cost. Why didn't Hollywood distance itself from him? Why was a known criminal welcomed into elite circles? Siegel helped shape Las Vegas into a criminal-controlled empire, proving that crime didn't need secrecy when power provided protection. When his usefulness ended, the consequences arrived suddenly. In 1947, Siegel was assassinated, shot through the eye while sitting in a Beverly Hills home. No trial, no arrests, no official answers. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, how many people knew exactly who he was and chose silence anyway? 4. Mickey Cohen, when criminals became celebrities. If Bugsy Siegel represented crime hiding in plain sight, Mickey Cohen represented something even more disturbing, crime that became entertainment. Cohen was a convicted racketeer, deeply involved in organized crime during Hollywood's golden age. But unlike criminals who lived in shadows, Cohen thrived in visibility. He gave interviews. He posed for photographs. He cultivated notoriety as if it were a brand. Why was a known criminal treated like a public figure? Why did notoriety replace accountability? Cohen served prison sentences, but they never erased his status. Each release brought him back into public life, proving that in certain circles, punishment was temporary, but fame was permanent. Hollywood had stopped asking whether these men were dangerous. It had begun asking whether they were interesting. The Golden Age wasn't built on innocence. It was built on selective blindness. Crimes were not denied, they were managed. Consequences weren't erased, they were delayed or redirected. And fame acted as a shield powerful enough to distort justice itself. So before the next part begins, ask yourself, how many crimes were never recorded at all? Because in part 2, the names become even more untouchable, and the silence surrounding them becomes impossible to ignore. That'd be why the time Hollywood reached what we now call its golden age, the machinery was already complete. Studios no longer reacted to scandals. They anticipated them. Publicists didn't defend stars, they rewrote reality around them. And the audience, hungry for fantasy, rarely asked what was being hidden so carefully. This era didn't collapse under crime. It adapted to it. And the most unsettling part is not that crimes occurred. It's how efficiently the system learned to survive them. As we move deeper into this story, ask yourself something uncomfortable. At what point does silence stop being ignorance and start becoming collaboration? 5. Fatty Arbuckle, acquitted, yet publicly executed. At the height of silent cinema, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was not just successful, he was essential. He was trusted with enormous budgets, groomed to shape the future of comedy, and treated as one of the industry's safest investments. Then came September 1921, a private party, a hotel room. An actress named Virginia Rapp, suddenly ill. Within days, she was dead, and Arbuckle was at the center of a narrative that the press was eager to exploit. What followed was unprecedented. 3 full trials, each more public than the last. Newspapers didn't wait for verdicts. They created their own. Headlines described excess, immorality, and guilt long before evidence was weighed. Arbuckle's body became a symbol. His fame turned against him. When the final jury acquitted him and issued a written apology, it should have ended there. But Hollywood had already moved on, not toward forgiveness, but toward erasure. Why did innocence fail to restore him? Why did truth matter less than perception? Studios quietly severed contracts. The industry rewrote its future without him. Arbuckle wasn't imprisoned. He was removed. And here is the question few ask. Was this justice correcting a mistake, or was it a public execution designed to reassure an anxious audience that the system could still police itself? Arbuckle became a warning, not about crime, but about becoming too inconvenient to protect. A pause worth considering. Before moving on, it's worth stopping here, because Arbuckle's story reveals something critical about the Golden Age. Fame did not guarantee protection. It guaranteed usefulness. Once a star threatened the illusion, even innocence could not save them. So the question becomes, who was protected, and who was sacrificed, and why? 6. Errol Flynn. When the courtroom became a stage. Errol Flynn represented everything the Golden Age wanted men to be. Confident, fearless, desired. He wasn't just cast as heroes. He embodied the fantasy that power came without consequence. That fantasy was tested in the early 1940s. Flynn was charged with statutory rape, accused of exploiting underage girls who described encounters defined by manipulation and imbalance of power. The allegations were not vague. They were detailed, explicit, and deeply troubling. Yet from the moment the trial began, something was clear. This was not a neutral process. Crowds gathered as if attending a premiere. Reporters wrote, as if reviewing a performance. Flynn's charisma wasn't merely present, it was weaponized. He was acquitted. Legally, the system closed the case. But ask yourself, what does acquittal mean in an environment already shaped by power? Why were the accusers scrutinized more aggressively than the accused? Why did charm and celebrity weigh as heavily as testimony? Hollywood didn't hesitate. Flynn returned to the screen. His image repaired itself with astonishing speed. And this raises a deeply unsettling realization. When the accused is beloved enough, the courtroom stops being a place of judgment and becomes a theater of persuasion. Justice wasn't denied outright. It was diluted. The fixers, architects of silence. If the courtroom was a stage, then the wings were occupied by men whose names never appeared on a marquee. To understand how the system survived, you have to look past the stars and into the shadows where Howard Strickling and Eddie Mannix operated. At MGM, they were known as the fixers. Their job wasn't to seek justice. It was to manage the physics of a scandal, to ensure that whenever a star fell, they never hit the ground hard enough to crack the studio's bottom line. They didn't just hide evidence. They re-engineered the narrative before the police even arrived. When a star was found in a compromised position, whether through substance abuse, a violent altercation, or a moral lapse, the fixer arrived first. They spoke to the witnesses. They spoke to the precinct captains. They spoke to the editors of the trade papers. By the time the public heard a whisper of trouble, the truth had already been laundered. A drunken brawl became exhaustion. A suicide attempt became an accidental overdose of sleeping powders. But this wasn't just PR. It was a structural necessity. The studios owned these people, literally. Under the morality clause, a star's private life was studio property. If you were useful, the fixers were your guardian angels. If you weren't, they were your executioners. Ask yourself, how much of what we call film history is actually just a carefully maintained list of secrets that didn't leak? The blacklist, the weaponization of morality. By the late 1940s, the machinery of control found a new, more clinical way to purge the inconvenient. It wasn't about hotel rooms or starlets anymore. It was about ideology. The House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC, didn't just hunt for subversives. It provided Hollywood with a convenient mechanism to demand total purity. If the Fatty Arbuckle era was about policing the body, the Blacklist era was about policing the mind. The industry didn't resist the Red Scare, it utilized it. Studios used the threat of the blacklist to break unions, lower salaries, and settle old scores. To stay employed, you had to name names. You had to prove your loyalty not just to your country, but to the system that fed you. The brilliance of the blacklist was its invisibility. There was no trial for most, just a phone call. There was no trial for most, just a phone call that stopped coming. A name scrubbed from a screenplay. A face edited out of the future. It was the ultimate refinement of the Arbuckle lesson. In Hollywood, you don't have to be guilty of a crime to be erased. You only have to be perceived as a liability. The architecture of the illusion. We often look back at the Golden Age through a lens of nostalgia, seeing the glamour, the soft focus, and the untouchable elegance. But that glow wasn't natural. It was the result of a massive, industrial-scale suppression of reality. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. It was designed to produce a product, the star, and like any factory, it had a waste management system for the scraps left behind. The victims of Errol Flynn, the reputation of Roscoe Arbuckle, the careers of the blacklisted, these were simply the byproducts of a dream factory that couldn't afford to stop the assembly line. The cost of the ticket. As we reach the end of this exploration, the discomfort should settle in. We are the ones who bought the tickets. We are the ones who demanded the fantasy remain untarnished. Was the silence of the studios a response to their own greed, or a response to our demand for perfection? Do we prefer the lie because the truth makes the art harder to enjoy? The golden age ended, but the machinery didn't vanish. It just became more sophisticated. It traded the heavy-handed fixer for the digital PR firm and the NDA. But the fundamental question remains, when we look at our idols, are we seeing a person, Or are we seeing the silence that was required to keep them standing?